Okay, welcome everybody to Citing Renewable Energy Projects in Wisconsin. Come in on, take a seat. I'd like to thank everybody for attending. Looking forward to the conversation we're going to have here. To start off with little introductions, I'm Ori Walsvik. I just got hired here in September as Renew's first staff attorney. So this is my first ever Renew Summit as well. So I hope you all can bear with me through that as I learn here, but I have a law degree from UW-Madison. Previous to my time at Renew, I was at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission out in D.C., or FERC. But I have a history of community engagement and activism here in Madison. And I'm excited to dive in at Renew, which I've already done. So before we really hop into it, I want to thank Stantec for sponsoring this panel and invite Chris Peaker here to come up and just say a few words. So here's Chris.
Hello, thanks everybody. Nice to see you. We sponsor this every year. We've been coming here for a long time, and now they let us come up and give our quick pitch. So I'll be quick and then beg you all to join Renew and support them, because they've been doing just a really kick-ass job out there on the utility scale dockets in which I'm involved. So who's Stantec? We are an international design firm. We do electrical, civil, engineering, environmental permitting surveys. Really, I just tell our clients that we guide projects to market. So we do everything in-house, that's the design, permitting, environmental surveys, and we've worked on, well over half the projects through the PSC docket. It's a lot of fun, it's a lot of challenge, a lot of nuance, a lot of great questions. Saw some of you folks at an open house last night, so that's super cool. But about Renew, so I've been coming to this since, the biggest project of the year was a rooftop project or a biodigester, and that was exciting. And then there were some pretty lean years. So what's happening now is insanely cool, and none of that would be happening without Renew focusing on this for 30 years. So really, give it up to Renew. And if you're an out-of-state developer and you're exploring this market, these are the people that you need supporting and throwing a shoulder into things. So Ori just started. I keep track of the dockets, and he's calling balls and strikes on it right now with briefs, and it's really good stuff. If anybody else has seen, when a project goes out to public comment on the docket, Renew fires up the troops, and they get 100+ positive comments flooding the PSC docket. I think that's really important. So join Renew, get on their listserv, and when they say, hey, we need a hand, contact now, do it. So anyways, that's it. Thanks, Ori.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it. So I'm going to start with a quick round of introductions here, and then we can get into some of our questions, and then we'll open it up more generally to audience questions. So Kurt Calkins, sitting on the far right here, is the Director of Columbia County Planning and Zoning, as well as Land and Water Conservation. He has a BS degree from University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, a major in wastewater and watershed management, a minor in soil science. He's in the 32nd year of his career in Columbia. He has also worked in Buffalo County, Camulet County, and 23 years in Columbia County. He lives in Poynette, Wisconsin with his wife Leslie and their 2 rescue dogs, and they spend their free time in Mercer, Wisconsin, enjoying the turtle flambeau flowage. So next is Grace Lakey. Grace is the Community Engagement Specialist, actually now the Chief of Staff at REN USA. She recently worked on Pattern Energy's 600 megawatt Uplands Wind Project in southwestern Wisconsin. As Madison native, Grace holds a BA in Political Science from Edgewood College, and after a brief stint working in local politics, she spent the last 3 years working on renewable energy siting and permitting across the country, with an emphasis on the Midwest and MISO region. And then last but certainly not least, we have Chelsea Chandler, the Climate, Energy, and Air Program Director at Clean Wisconsin. Chelsea draws on her experience in climate science and policy, relationships with decision makers and diverse stakeholders across the state, as well as a passion for environmental sustainability and justice to advocate for climate action in Wisconsin. Chelsea has worked on climate issues for over a decade in Wisconsin, the West Coast, and Latin America, all over the world. So I wanted to just welcome all of our panelists, and I guess I'll hop right into it. My first question is for Chelsea, but everyone is free to respond as important ideas come up. So with more solar projects being sited on farmland, some people are concerned about solar being a threat to growing food. Are solar and agricultural activities compatible?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I actually wear two hats. I work for Clean Wisconsin okay, sorry. Can you guys hear me? Okay, I'll lean into this. Thanks. So I work for Clean Wisconsin, as Ori said, but I'm also a farmer. I live in the Driftless in southwest Wisconsin. And so this question really is near and dear to my heart because I know that we need more renewable energy, and I also know that we need a healthy and robust food system. But knowing those two things, I would say that definitely solar and agriculture are compatible. And I think it's useful to think about the bigger context when we hear this question, because when we hear agriculture, we think food. But the reality is our agricultural system is providing food, fiber, and fuel already. And I think we ignore that last bit. So in Wisconsin, for example, we grow 4 million acres of corn, and 1 million acres of that, or a quarter, is grown for ethanol, and that's, of course, blended into gasoline. We use that in our cars. So we're already using a lot of our prime ag land to grow energy, and we're actually doing that quite inefficiently. So Clean Wisconsin last year conducted an analysis that was basically looking at the kind of relative land use efficiency of solar versus corn-derived ethanol on a per-acre basis, and it turns out that solar is 100 times more efficient. Like, you can get 100 times more energy per acre than growing corn for ethanol. So if you look at those numbers, basically we'd need about 2% of Wisconsin farmland to meet our energy needs to get to net zero by mid-century. So that's not nothing, but it's a third of what we're using today to grow corn for ethanol and efficiently. So, there's a lot of other benefits, including, soil health and water quality of not having that kind of more intensive annual cropping and having more perennial cover. So I think just the bottom line is we do need more solar. It takes up a small fraction of farmland, and there's kind of smarter ways that we can treat our farmland and those resources than we're doing right now. And I think we also need to think about what some of the other real threats are to Wisconsin agriculture and our farmland. Urban sprawl and subdivisions, that's really a permanent loss of that land. Some of the practices from the annual crops, like I talked about, that are really eroding our soil and diminishing our soil health. So I think we just need to look at the bigger picture. I think that definitely solar is compatible. We could actually free up more land to grow more food if we grew our energy here more efficiently. So solar starts to look like a really good option when you kind of look at the math.
Yeah, thank you. My next question is for Grace. So when a project is announced in an area, can municipalities, businesses, and residents come directly to developers with concerns? Do they need to wait before they go through a process? What's the best way to get in contact with the developer if somebody has a concern about the project? That concern can be anything, right?
Yeah, so I love this question because I think so frequently when I'm in communities engaging with people, a lot of times they have questions or concerns that are easily addressed and they don't know who to go to and they don't know where to go. Always reach out to developing companies. In my role at RenUSA, my entire job is to be in the communities, engaging and be that present face for whatever development company may be in your area. If it's not me, it's someone similar doing that role internally, externally, whatever it may be. Google the company that is coming to your area, whatever that company may be. Reach out to their contact emails, their phone numbers. There's always a lot of readily available contact information, and they will get back to you. reach out with your questions. There are developers, project managers. There's always people on the ground. A lot of times, once they get to a certain point, they'll have local offices that you can find. There is no such thing as a stupid question. There is no such thing as a recommendation we don't want to hear. No matter how you feel, if you reach out, there's always somebody excited to talk to you. And at the end of the day, community members know more about the community than any of us can grasp, despite the time we spend there. There are things that are cultural, historical, that we just don't always see right away. And so the more we can hear from the community and the more feedback we can get from the community early on, the more efficient and a better project that we can build, and really better partners we can be to that community.
Yeah, thank you. I want to lift up Chelsea a little bit in Clean Wisconsin here. They've committed to being out in areas where projects are being developed, but I want to kind of take that a step further and just ask your advice, Chelsea. And then also, Kurt, I'd ask you to comment. How can people who are interested in being proponents of these projects and advocating for these projects, how can they most effectively engage, at the county or local level, but then also in their communities? What's your experiences there?
You want me to go first? Okay. Yeah, I think that, first of all, I'll say it's really important for those local voices to be present. It's helpful for folks in Madison and, across the state to support projects too, but what really matters is the folks that are in those hosting communities. I think that, the messenger often matters as much as, or if not more than the message itself. So I think that is really huge. It's, making sure that the respected leaders in communities are engaging, and, those are local elected officials, it's local farmers, local health professionals, nurses, family physicians. Those are folks that really hold a lot of esteem in their communities and that people look to and value their opinions. And so there's a number of different ways that they can support projects. One is pretty straightforward. If there's a proposed project in your community, once the public comment period opens up at the Public Service Commission, you can submit a comment and, again, kind of note your local connection to the project. You can also write an op-ed in your local paper. I think that has a lot of weight. It takes a little time to write, but it's, in my experience, pretty easy to get published in some of the smaller papers, often looking for content. And I will say, from personal experience, I know in my local paper, every 2 to 3 weeks, I see an anti-wind opinion piece, and it's almost always the same person who writes it. Once in a while, there's somebody else, but I think it just really shows what kind of outsized impact one person can have. And right now, I think we're seeing that a little bit more, actually quite a bit more, from the opposition than from supporters. You can show up to community meetings, especially if there's renewable energy projects or, an anti-renewable ordinance that's being discussed to demonstrate. We heard this morning that there's sort of a more vocal minority, and so it's important to get some of that majority in the supporters to show that they do support the project too, and that helps give some of the local electeds some cover and some confidence that their community does support those projects. You can even engage on social media. I know nobody likes picking Facebook battles and see them as fruitless, but research shows that even if you're not going to, say somebody posts some misinformation and you respond to it, you're not going to convince the person who posted it, but what you are going to do is you're going to show that there's disagreement. You're just going to show that, whoever posted that might not be totally truthful, or there's some differing opinions, or it's more complicated than it seems. And so other people who see that are going to say, oh, well, maybe that's not quite right, and they might be a little more persuadable. So that can be valuable too. But ultimately, we just need more people showing up in support of things. It's not always very comfortable for us. I think, especially, as the environmental movement, we kind of cut our teeth opposing things. We oppose pipelines, oppose, toxic industry, opposing fossil fuels. It's easy to rally around a villain, and it's not as simple to ask people to show up for a beautiful vision of a clean energy future. But There's just really fascinating conversations going on kind of nationally right now as we talk about, all this federal money for infrastructure, and we just need to get behind building things for a clean energy future. It's not just blocking things, but we need to build these things that we need to see in our communities too. So I think it takes a little bit of a change in mindset as well to convince people why they need to show up in support of things.
Yeah, thanks. So, Kurt, we've kind of heard about these projects, complicated projects that might have some more nuance than they initially started. You have experience with a lot of these. Solar, wind, you kind of discussed to me before this that you're a little bit of an old hat at that at this point. But looking forward, what are a couple things that municipal government staff needs to know that would make your staff lives easier when it comes to questions about these projects?
Sure. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thanks, Ori, for the question. So I probably should have added this for those that don't know. Columbia County, kind of the reason I think when Ori says an old hat, 2019, people remember COVID in Columbia County. I remember my first solar development project phone call. And from that point in time, it has been a interesting road in Columbia County, both on the large Public Service Commission side of projects. We have 2 of those that have been approved through the Public Service Commission, and we've approved and processed 4 conditional use permit size projects through zoning. And so the part of that, you folks all in this room probably understand the relationship between the Columbia Power Plant, forecasting to be shut down. People have said Columbia County has become ground zero of opportunity. So yeah, we've had a lot of that. It's been an interesting road, but from my standpoint, when I kind of accepted to come down here, it's to understand that, my job, you'll see the 2 titles. I manage both our land and water and our planning and zoning department, but the conversations do cross over into both worlds for the local communities, but it's primarily a planning and zoning discussion. So folks, most of you are probably pretty schooled in how zoning works, right? At the county level, communities opt in to county zoning. In Columbia County, we have 21 towns, and of those 21 towns, 18 are under county zoning. So when you start looking at projects and their size, and you folks know that, the Public Service Commission size projects are not directly in our purview. The ones under 100 megawatts are in our purview. But things that we've learned, I've learned along the way when Ori asked me to think about this question is, my job here and back in the office and at public hearings is not to decide, winners or losers or favorites or not favorites, things that I may be in favor of solar, I may not be in favor of solar. But it's to provide the process, right, and facts and documentation and understanding the laws and understanding how we need to proceed with these. And we've done a very good job of that, I think, in helping people understand that. But things that I've noticed that do make the conversation more complicated for these types of projects are a number of things. First, in Columbia County, one of the big topics of conversation when High Noon was going through the Public Service Commission process early in its application was, and everybody, you guys know these things, sees the environmental assessment portion of the project, right? They send a letter out, they notify people the docket's got the information flowing. The immediate response to that locally was by folks who are concerned, and I'm not saying they're on one side or the other, but they're concerned is people, immediately want to go to an environmental impact statement, right? And that type of process, right? Which is a much more detailed process, and whether it's warranted or not for these types of projects, I'm not the one to say, but I do think for the industry as a whole, that is one suggestion I would make is when you look at environmental assessment, it's not the same review as an environmental impact statement. It may not be necessary, but to the general public, to them it matters. Just the initials matter, right? And so my one suggestion is, and for the industry is, could there be some sort of neutrally sponsored, environmental impact study done on some poster project, right? So some project goes through those steps that maybe a pipeline development goes through, right, or something like that. So all these conversations can be had, right? I'm sure that would get into, if Department of Agriculture was brought into those conversations, they would speak to the agricultural land base, the use, the commodities, things like that. So that's one suggestion, because when we take a CUP through the process, it's really an environmental assessment, right? We look at all the things that we know, and we look at that. So that's my one suggestion. The other one is batteries and battery storage. I live in a world of technical standards that people much smarter than me or numbers of people have developed along the way, right? So manure storage, animal waste storage, right? That standard is developed 10-fold, 15-fold over 30 years. But it's a standard, right? And so when I permit a waste storage structure, it meets standards for, acceptable by the state, by the feds, but it's like the industry standard. So that's, when we talk about batteries, a lot of the conversations around them are fears, right? Risks. What if? Sure, they'll build it that way. No, they won't. How do we know they're going to build it? And the developers tell us we're going to do this, 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 and this. But it's, again, them saying, you not listening, you not agreeing. So I think some sort of industry standard for how you deal with battery storage and the risks associated with it would be good. And then the other one that I would throw out there real quickly is some sort of cohesive message over property value impacts. That always is, when I filter these down, I try to look at what are real concerns versus perceived or whatever. And if a project was going in next to my home, I would be concerned, right? You telling me it won't matter as a developer, let's say, may not make me feel 100% comfortable, right? And so we don't have a real mechanism in place. I've looked at plenty of studies online on weekends, right, trying to get a sense of this stuff. But I think some sort of, again, peer-reviewed, maybe impartial analysis of what those impacts are, and then also some sort of industry standard on how you deal with those. If there are real property value impacts, then how does the industry deal with those? My takeaway is they're indirectly or directly dealt with through good neighbor agreements, right? We've seen that where a person comes in and finally, some people have called it a payoff, right? Whatever, right? It's a financial mechanism to deal with whatever is real. So those are my three.
Thanks, Kurt. I think we were just taking a look at 2023 year in review and discussing with Michael Vickerman earlier. I don't think a single battery storage project had the same technology used on the utility scale side. So, when Kurt's calling his neighboring county counterpart, they're dealing with something completely different. They can't, work together on that. I think that's an important thing to take back. Next question is for Grace, talking about, developers are newcomers in communities. They want to find the best way to find success with their project. How do they go about that? What are the best ways that you see to go about that process?
So I would say my overarching recommendation for developers in new communities is communication early and often. What that really allows you to do is set that narrative and then control that narrative. As Chelsea kind of touched on, and a lot of other panelists will touch on, and we see in everyday life, what happens so frequently is there is this small but very vocal minority who feels a certain way about a renewable energy project. And what makes them so successful is they get out there right out of the gate. They start connecting with people. They start spreading the information that they feel is accurate. They set up their Facebook pages. They set up their groups. And unfortunately, by the time developers will get in there and start engaging with the community, this really negative and honestly really filled with misinformation narrative has already been established. And it's not impossible to fight that narrative back. It's easy to do if you know how to do it, but what is so much easier is controlling that narrative from the start. Getting in that community, meeting with those influential figures like Chelsea talked about, meeting with administrators, elected officials, community leadership, giving them the information that they need to feel confident to answer questions from the community. There will always be those 5 to 10 people who don't support renewable energy projects. And the goal for development and for engagement in these communities to me, is not to change the mind of those 10 detractors. It is to provide factual information for the people who may be undecided to stop that misinformation from spreading. If you can neutralize that misinformation and take someone who is somewhat indifferent to the project, has lived in this community their whole lives, but is getting a lot of admittedly really scary information, you see the narratives that are spread by these oppositions, and it's easy from an industry perspective to say, well, that's silly, that's not what's gonna happen, but when you live in this community and it's your whole life and you're hearing these narratives that basically everything you've ever known is going to change, that's a really difficult and really scary pill to swallow. And getting in there before that narrative starts to be really clear, your way of life is not going to change. The community is not going to be that different than what it was. Your neighbor is still your neighbor. These people are the same people that you've always known. But the sooner you can get in there and set the record straight, be honest, and again, provide that face where people can say, hey, I was at church this morning and I heard something really scary about your project. I'm calling you because I want to know if that's true or not. And you can set that right away before that narrative spreads to somebody else in the coffee shop and then somebody else in the office. Ending it right before it starts is the most effective way to really combat that misinformation and neutralize a lot of people who otherwise won't be opposed to the project. They're just only hearing from one really negative set of people who are spreading really scary misinformation about it.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. Maybe just bouncing off that question, Kurt, wanted to ask you to maybe speak to either municipal staff or elected officials or people looking to give their officials advice. You know, when a developer comes into your community, a lot of times whoever's in right now is worried. They have a lot of questions. Is it your advice that they should stay away, push it off, or should they engage early and often, even if they might be opposed to the project, or they're not exactly buying into everything, but they have questions?
So if I understand it right, you're saying like if a project is being proposed in an area, should the leadership start engagement, and with who and how?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay. So I think I look back, right? History always teaches us something. So I look back at, I'll use this example. One of the large-scale projects that has now worked its way through the permitting process in Columbia County. Engagement started like every day in our office, and I kind of joke when I say that, but people contact our office, the planning and zoning office, all the time to set up meetings to talk about ideas and dreams, right? It can be as simple as a garage addition. Can be as big as a new house, can be an entire project like this, right? So we do that all the time with people to understand how it works. This one particular project, when we had that meeting, the next question I got from those folks is, how do we contact county leadership, right? And I said, well, they're right down the hall. Let's go down there, right? And so we set up a meeting. I think engagement is important I think it's important no matter what the flavor of the conversation is. The reason I bring that example up is the reaction to that conversation. The first conversation was that this is going to be controversial. We should probably keep it low on the table of conversations, right? Let's we'll put it down here. We'll work on it later, right? That doesn't work, right? And so it kind of came back and bit the conversation, I would say, because I think, right, you're either on the offense or the defense, right, when it comes to conversations. In that particular case, I certainly would have liked the county to have, again, not picked a side on the issue so much as just made people aware that the conversation was going to be starting, right, through some sort of information meeting. So you can start to lead the conversation with facts and figures and laws and rules and how the thing is going to play out, right? None of us back in the board days, right, when we sat down with the board, we didn't sit down and play Monopoly and then learn about the directions or the instructions halfway or three-quarters way through the game. So, yes, I think engagement, I think you certainly should start at the leadership level. And I think for our perspective, it's always going to be the town governments, right? And the county government leadership, and then certainly departments, whether they have town zoning, their connection to zoning, or a department like ours. And I think every one of them we've dealt with has done that. It's how we and I say we, the county, the government reacted to that. And I think that first one was a little slow on the reaction time. I think we should have got out in front of it, so.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Kurt. Chelsea, maybe just speaking to community member support, where have you seen someone be an effective advocate? What is really an effective use of people's time on a front like that?
Yeah, well, I think like I was saying earlier, it's really making sure that it's those local influencers that are able to speak out, have real conversations with other people. I think that helps both kind of combat misinformation and can help people to kind of understand and contextualize what some of the local benefits can mean for their communities. To be honest, I think that there's a lot of room for improvement in this area. I think that I see, for example, when people are talking about some of the economic benefits that can come to communities, they're often just these big kind of generalities and big numbers, but it's hard to break down what that means for people. So, in Wisconsin for wind and solar project, hosting communities split basically $4,000 per megawatt. So for 300 megawatt project, that's over $1 million that's going directly into their community every year. And I think a lot of people don't realize that because they think, oh, if you own land and you're signing a lease, you get something, but the rest of us just have to look at it and we're not getting the benefits. But what do those benefits mean for your local community? I think local leaders could really do a lot to help folks understand for our specific community, here is how we can put it to use. It could repair roads. It could be used for, this infrastructure. It could be invested in our local schools. I keep talking about our local newspaper, but that's where a lot of people get information. I was reading an article the other day talking about how in Wisconsin, they expect 95% of schools to go to referenda in the next couple of years. Our schools, and especially rural schools, are really facing crisis. We heard a great success story about how electric school buses were part of a solution in helping to save a local school district. So, I think that there are some good examples of local engagement, but I think that we really have a long ways to go to build up more local supporters in the area and do that kind of get more community buy-in. I think we're doing okay at getting some engagement through PSC processes and things like that, but that's only part of the battle. There's the project approval side, and then there's having Wisconsinites more broadly embrace clean energy as part of a kind of robust clean economy future.
Yeah, thank you. So this topic is a little more close to my world, but I want to talk about this trend we've seen recently, and this is for Kurt, but everyone can chime in here. We've seen municipalities around the state faced with pressure to adopt some restrictive ordinances on solar, wind. Oftentimes these ordinances are illegal. They're going to subject the towns to liability. Do counties need to adopt ordinances like this? Is that the only way that they can kind of secure the interests of their community, or is there other ways that they can successfully, put these projects to the standards that they expect?
So what I guess, the question I would look at in kind of, again, it depends the landscape that you're in, right? If you pull up a map, you can Google it, right? Where towns, what part of Wisconsin is covered by zoning, right? Whether it's town zoning or county zoning. It's not everywhere, right? So there are, even in Columbia County, we have 2 towns that we call it the Wild Wild West, that they have no zoning, right? They have no rules, they've chosen not to. So when you think about ordinances, right, the first thing that I'll say about the conversation is there was tremendous pressure in Columbia County to, everyone would come up to the microphone and say, we need an ordinance. And they'd say, Mr. Calkins will not bring forward an ordinance, right? And my apprehension at the time was that people have to understand, lots of things are codified, are captured in county ordinances that are not regulatory in nature, right? We have processes captured in ordinances. We have fee schedules captured in ordinances. So, but the flavor at the microphone is we want an ordinance that stops them, right? And so that was my apprehension. But we worked through that. But we are now, and I brought a copy of it here, just if I needed to reference anything. But we've gotten to a point now that we do feel that an ordinance again, under our zoning, an ordinance modification to our zoning ordinance clarifying the parts and pieces. Again, we already have wind captured. State law has dealt with that, solar. But we think there's tremendous value for us in making some changes to the zoning ordinance that spell out the parts and pieces. The parts and pieces being solar on your house, at your house, right? People are confused over that. You want to put panels on your roof, you want to put them in your yard, we got to spell out the exact process for that. Then we have projects that are under 100 megawatts, right? Those go through our conditional use permit process. We currently have mechanisms to deal with the projects we've dealt with, but people want more clarity. We think the clarity provides value not only to my staff, not only to the committee, also to the developer. I see Eric back there. Eric and I dealt back and forth, right, with on their two projects. I think you would have rather had a list of things that you needed to supply to us from the start for your application, right? So getting that stuff in there is valuable for the developer. Here's where it goes, right? And then we also clarified in this draft ordinance, again, it hasn't been approved yet, is the parts and pieces for large-scale solar, right? Large-scale solar, we don't get to say when, where, and how directly, but you still have to go through some permitting processes on our administrative permitting side, right? So we can clarify that for people. So I think there is value in that as long as people understand what you cannot expect an ordinance to do. And the calls I get from my peers are, so I heard you guys are working on an ordinance to stop solar. No, that's not at all what we're doing, right? We're working on an ordinance that would help clarify the parts and pieces for all the players, including myself and everyone. So as far as, and I think that's important. Now, the reason I say it is that if you don't have zoning in a township or a county, that conversation is different, right? But it still leads you back to, and I'll use this example real quick, is one of the most, one of the groups of people that have attended most of our county board meetings that are angry about a specific large-scale project are from the town of Cortland, okay? Town of Cortland is not under county zoning. And I have tried to explain to people, no matter what you convince me to change or you change, it won't apply there, right? And that's my world.
Okay, so I'm going to turn to some audience questions now. So anybody who wants to jump in from the panel, feel free. The first one, I think, Grace, might be good for you. Have you had any success, or would you anticipate good community involvement with proactive informational discussion sessions led by third parties?
So we have seen some information sessions. I love a good information session. It's one of my favorite things to put on in this job. I think in order for an information session to be successful, it has to be a very collaborative process. Whether it is a third party or the developer themselves, making sure that you are in touch both with the community and the developer, if it is a third party, to make sure that this is the information that the community is looking for. Nobody wants to show up to an information session and all the answers they have are not the answers to the questions. Then it's a waste of their time. So making sure, here are the community needs, here are the desires, how can we provide that accurate information? Working with developers to say, what is worth addressing, what is worth tackling. There's a lot of processes and steps in the development process that even someone working in the industry, it's really not clear. And I think those are always worth having those discussions and addressing that. It's, again, another really good way to take control of that narrative really early on and set the record straight and be clear about this is what the project is, this is what the project is not. I think those are always really beneficial. When you work on those sessions, I think it is important to make sure that you are not so interested in sharing information that you're inadvertently sharing misinformation. It's hard when you end up in a situation where you want to see both sides, but you don't want to be spreading misinformation further than it would have gotten had it not happened at all. So finding that balance of getting the community the information they need, answering questions, and providing all of the facts about the project while making sure that you're not unintentionally furthering some of those misinformation points.
Sure, if you would like to use the microphone. Yeah. I'm not sure. I think Mike actually might have a mic that you could use as well.
Okay. Yo, you hear it?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, hi. I'm Sherry Gruder. I'm with UW Extension. I'm a statewide energy specialist, and I run the Energy on Wisconsin program. And I just want people to know that this has been wonderful, by the way, really excellent. What I haven't heard anybody mention is extension. We have extension offices in counties all over the state. People trust their extension educators. We are experts at facilitation. And what I want people to know is that we are very involved in large-scale renewable energy projects. We have a federal grant through Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and US DOE. We're working in Portage County right now on those. And we're developing processes that land use planners and extension educators can use in engaging communities. It's wonderful that developers bring in people like you to answer questions, but it's different because you're not a trusted person in the community. And so what we're trying to do is develop resources and ways to make these processes happen so that people feel heard, because especially with anything over 100 megawatts, people don't feel heard. But there are a lot of points during the process where they can be involved. So I just want everybody to know that we are developing resources. We have one through our attorney at our local government center that helps landowners who are approached by developers know what to ask. It's about 11 or 12 pages. We will be redoing it as well. We are working on a project that is going to develop a guideline. It will be published nationally for use all around the country. This is a huge issue that DOE is addressing. We also applied for an RSTEP grant through the federal government, through DOE. We'll find out in March, but we put together a collaborative, extensions heading it. But we put together a collaborative to actually address this, and it's a 3-year project, so we hope we bring it in. And so please include extension in the discussion and know that we try to bring research-based information, but also really deep listening into the communities that we work with. Thank you.
Thanks. So this next one is from a member of the Wisconsin Farmers Union who advocates for family farmers. And so this is kind of in the vein of some of the themes we've been discussing here. They have some members who feel that there are large companies that are taking advantage of farmers. They want to exclude prime farmland from development. They want more transparency. How do you guys address those concerns? And what would you just say to those concerned individuals?
Maybe I'll start on that one. I'm also a proud Wisconsin Farmers Union member, and I was at state convention this year, and we spoke a lot actually about renewable energy policy because it's a growing issue, and people, are kind of grappling with what that means for their family farms. And I think there are very much people in two camps. One camp sees this as a big change to the landscape, a threat to prime agricultural land. There's another camp that sees this as an opportunity and actually a way to address some of the challenges that we're seeing in small family farms and being able to stay on the land, as having solar as part of a diversified source of income that's not dependent on what a bushel of corn is going for that year, but that is sustained for a long-term lease, and that allows them to pass the land on to their kids and keep it in the family and not have to sell it off. So people really are kind of divided. What I heard a lot in that meeting from different members across the state was just kind of questions of trust and transparency. So I think that, hearing from developers is great. I think hearing from, Extension, hearing from other trusted messengers, hearing from farmers that have done this for their farm, the signed leases and seen the benefits, I think is really huge in telling those stories. And just trying to get more information that people trust. I know people feel like maybe they're getting a bad deal or that this is kind of an extractive industry, someone who's coming in and doesn't understand kind of their values and their way of life. At that same convention, I met somebody who was talking about this tool called LandGate, which they describe it as the Zillow of land resources, where you can go to their website, type in your address, and look up kind of average solar lease prices in the area. And not just solar, they do it for all kinds of land resources, minerals, wind, and things like that too. But that's the kind of thing that can help people understand, that they're getting a fair lease agreement, because there's some concerns about, it's all confidential. Maybe they're just trying to, undersell me, and somebody else might be getting a better deal if they negotiate better. So I think that there are some more tools like that too that we could be using more, just so people feel a little more ease and that it's more of a mutually beneficial partnership and not something that's kind of exploitative or foreign that's kind of coming in and just taking up this precious resource and not giving back.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you repeat the name of the site where you can go in and get information about
Yeah, LandGate.
LandGate?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So this next question is from engineers and environmental consultants, and they want to know how can they best support municipalities as they navigate changes in energy projects and energy developments.
I suppose you're looking at me.
I suppose.
I think twofold. I think one is, getting as complete of packages, like, again, CUP type conversations, things that would come across my desk, having as complete a package as you can, the first time. I mean, that's always some of the back and forth is, and that's again where I use the example of, if I get these ordinance changes codified, right, then I can just hand this to you and say, get me all this. We do it all the time. Somebody will turn in an application for an addition and they won't have a site plan. Well, go home and do a site plan, come back, right? So these bigger projects, I think that's really important, is having as complete a package as either we require or we discuss with you or what we need. That's important. I think also being as responsive as you can, right? I mean, some of these things, and Eric, I'll point out, Eric again was super patient as we processed the projects that we went through. Because for us it was our first rodeo really going through some of these things. So ask them to be patient too when they're going through that, realizing that at one point in time I had a stack about this tall. One of my lead planners was out on maternity leave, and I had a stack this big, and my office administrator would say, Kurt, the stack, and I'm like, I can only do so much, right? And some of those larger projects, right, you need to lock yourself in a room for days to put the parts and pieces together. So the more complete they are, it's important. And then I think having the ability to, when you get to the point that you're at a public hearing, let's say for a conditional use permit, having as many facts, I mean, you guys know the questions, right? You know what people are concerned about. Have as much of that information available that you can, and I agree with the UW Extension role, right? I mean, that is one of the challenges that come up in these conversations is impartiality, right? So you say, right? And so having the ability to provide some sort of sourced information if there's a controversial issue that is, from some sort of neutrally accepted entity would be important.
Thanks, Kurt. Well, we are over time, so I think that wraps up our panel. I noticed there were some questions in the chat about more front-end utility scale questions. Feel free to reach out to Renew or Clean or your developer about those questions, but Renew is always open as a resource to chat about that in depth offline about how some of those decisions get made. I want to say thanks to Chelsea, Grace, and Kurt. And Stantec and Chris for sponsoring this panel. Invite everybody to join us for our lunch plenary in the main ballroom. So thank you, everybody.